if I'm pronouncing your name correctly, it's Michele Braniff, correct?
That's right. Yes.
Okay, great. And you're the candidate, the Cambridge candidate for the Green Party.
That's right. That's right.
Great, very good. And are you a lifelong resident of Cambridge, or how long have you been in Cambridge?
So I've lived in Cambridge since 2000, about 9 years. So I've lived in Cambridge about 9 years.
Okay.
I worked in Cambridge maybe 5 or 6 years before that. And I used to live in Plattsville, which is in Oxford County.
Yep.
So,
very good.
you know, when you live in a rural place, you go to the cities.
Yes, of course.
Right. So so I always felt quite connected to Waterloo region and Cambridge, even when I was living in, and then I moved to Cambridge when my youngest went away to school.
I see. Okay, perfect.
Because I was working there, and I was very involved in the art community. So I'm an artist, and I was spending a lot of time in Cambridge, and I thought, well, and I found a great place to live.
Yeah, perfect. Great. Awesome. So what is your, you had mentioned something about your work. What is your professional career?
Well, it's very eclectic. I practice law, so I came to, I'm originally, my family's originally from Kitchener. My mom and dad actually met in Cambridge.
Okay.
At a youth dance, right?
At a youth dance, okay.
Yeah. And it's really cute because, of course, when they met, there wasn't Galt, it was Galt, Preston, Hesper,
Preston,
right?
and Hesper, right.
Yeah. So my dad, you know how married couples are. My dad would say that they met in Preston. My mother said, no, it was in Galt. And then when I asked them questions, it turned out near where the golf course is, there used to be a dance hall, which is kind of almost, it's in between, right? They were both kind of right.
Yep.
So I had this very long connection to Cambridge before I was a twinkle in my dad's eye kind of thing. But they moved around a little bit, and I was a lawyer, and I got a position with a law firm in Kitchener.
I see, okay.
So I practiced law for a number of years, and then I was a mediator. And while I had my kids, I went back to school and got a master's degree at Waterloo Lutheran Seminary. It was to do counseling. So I worked for Lutherwood for about 17 years.
Okay, yeah.
And for a while I ran Lutherwood Family Counseling in Cambridge. So it was while I was working at Lutherwood Family Counseling that it was very convenient to move, because I could walk to work. I go home at lunch.
Sure.
It was great.
Yeah.
And then I've taught at University of Waterloo. I've taught business law. I've taught conflict resolution courses, and I'm teaching at a community college now, like social justice, social policy courses for social service workers.
Okay.
And then I'm an artist. I have a little business doing graphic recording to help people with creative and innovative ideas.
Okay.
So,
perfect.
Yeah.
Very good. So you decided to throw your hat in the ring.
Yes.
What made you decide to do that?
Well, this is my third time running.
Okay.
And so what happened is, I have adult children, and my daughters are in their 30s. So when they were little girls is probably when I started voting Green. So it was a relatively new party. And in Oxford County, it was a conservative riding, right? So, but I kept on voting Green because I believed in the Green Party. And then when I moved to Cambridge, I thought, well, I'm going to start working for the Green Party. So I went to a meeting and I signed up as a volunteer to get ready. So this is around 2014. They were looking for people to help with the 2015 election. And the volunteer position that was available was candidate.
No, of course.
So, and I'm like, who's going to be the candidate? Who's going to be the candidate? And
funny you should ask.
Yeah, why don't you do it? And then I said, well, that's on my bucket list, which of course, once I said that I was remotely interested, so that's how I got involved.
So you got voluntold.
Yes. But I mean, it was something that I thought I would do eventually. And it was a fairly small campaign in 2015. There were really, to say a handful of volunteers would be pretty accurate. Yep. And one of the really cool things is we have scaled up quite a bit. We have a lot more volunteers this time. So that's very exciting.
Yeah, well, it seems that the party's getting some wheels for sure.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
Yeah, very good. So let me ask you, why, as a voter myself, why should somebody vote green? Why would you encourage somebody to vote green?
Well, so the Green Party has policies to look after the climate crisis, and there is a climate crisis. And the Conservatives, they don't have much of a plan to deal with it. Mm-hmm. To the extent the Liberals have a plan, it's not moving fast enough. It's not aggressive enough. We need to move more quickly because it is a crisis. It's a small window of opportunity. It's not like we need to panic, but we need to start an action, and we need to change things in a very significant way. So the Green Party has a policy for that, Mission Possible, and it's very feasible. And the Green Party also has, a lot of people don't know about the social contract part of the platform, that they're improving the lives for ordinary people. And why you should vote for them. The platform is very well researched. In the nonprofit field, we always want to do practices that are evidence informed or evidence based. So someone's done a research, we know it works. Mm-hmm. And sometimes politics is driven by convenience, mm-hmm. or lobby groups, mm-hmm. or ideology. In the Green Party, the decisions are based on the evidence. So mm-hmm. it's set up on the values. So values like sustainability and social justice, and so all of those things, they'll line up with my values. And what I like to invite voters is, if that lines up with their values, then they want to vote green.
Sure. Okay. Now I was looking at the party's website and looking at the platform. And it seems to cover a lot of bases. And what sort of makes me wonder is, the name of the party itself sort of gives the misconception that there's a one policy in this particular party's concerns. And obviously that's not the case. You guys have got quite a few things on the site here. So which makes me wonder, maybe they should change the name, because people right away, they assume that, well, the Green Party is just all about the environment, never mind the rest of it.
Yeah, so one of the reasons not to change the name is the Green Party of Canada is separate from the Green Party of Ontario, is separate from the Green Party of New Brunswick, but there are Green Parties all around the world.
I see.
So the name is something that connects the Green Party internationally. So that's an incentive not to change the name. And the reality is, we can do a lot. We need to do a better marketing job. Mm-hmm. But it's interesting. I was at a meeting for Mike Morris. He's the candidate in Kitchener. Yep. And they were trying to address this challenge. Is we're not just about the environment. I talked to a couple afterwards from Cambridge, and they said they didn't even talk about the environment. There's a climate crisis. I thought the Green Party was about the environment. So, mm-hmm. It reminded me that we can't forget our roots. So one of the things that I like to suggest is green. Of course, green is the color of, the environment and the woods and the trees and growing mm-hmm. things. But we also associate green with growth and regeneration. Mm-hmm. And the Green Party is a party of social innovation. So mm-hmm. in business and in nonprofit sector, we talk about social innovation as doing collaborative things very creatively to really harness many, many people dealing with complex and quite wicked problems. Mm-hmm. And so I think of the green as being green for innovation, green for new growth, new ways of doing things. Green for applying what we learned from the ecosystems to social systems to understand them in a more of an organic way. So we do need to make sure the message gets across. But I mean, we're the only party that has a color named after it.
Yes, that's right. Very good. So let me ask you a question. So let's just say, you know, it's October 22nd and the Green Party wins a majority government. How is that going to affect the lives of Canadians? What will be the impact of a victory like that?
So I think what's probably more likely is that the Green Party will have the balance of responsibility in a minority government.
Okay.
Okay. And that may not take that many seats. It could be 5 seats. It could be 10 seats. Green Party, we're thinking we've got a fairly solid chance on 10 seats. Even the polls, who tend to discount us, see us getting 5 seats. So it's
and there's
entirely
one, correct? And there's
currently
one.
Currently we have 2.
Oh, 2. I'm sorry. Okay.
We have 2. Yes.
Good.
We don't want to lose half of our seats.
Sorry about that.
Yeah. So we and I mean that second seat is really relevant because it was a by-election. It was relatively recent, and there has been what we call the green wave. Is the green has, you know, it's the West Coast, it's the East Coast. There's Greens in a balance of responsibility situation in both New Brunswick and in British Columbia, having a lot of influence. So however you cut it, if there are enough Greens to have an influence, we've actually set up our platform that we're the only party who doesn't say, if you vote us in and we have a majority, we'll do this. We say, if we have enough seats to make any influence, we will put forward this platform. And I think, you know, it's kind of like that, you know, we try harder, or we need to do a better job, or maybe it's like being a woman in a man's world. You have to be about 2 or 3 times as good to be recognized as having any ability. So the Green Party's got this costed out platform that's very, very detailed. It's based on values, which means the way you discuss it is not, it's not a contest. So it's, you know, if the parliamentary budget officer had some comments to make, the Green Party responds, makes things better and gives it back. It ends up with it's costed in a more thorough way, and it's better. So that, you know, our platform is there as a solid starting spot with what our values are. We're not going to compromise our values, but if we've got other parties who want to negotiate, it's like this is what needs to happen.
Yeah.
And I'll give you an example of Mike Schreiner, who is he's the you know, the leader of the Green Party of Ontario, first Green Party member of provincial parliament, and he's you know, one MPP in the Doug Ford Conservative government, which is not known for being pro-environment. I think that's fair to say. I don't think if Doug Ford were here, I think he'd probably say, no, we're not, that's not our big priority. And Mike Schreiner was successful with, he had a bill called the Paris Galt Moraine Bill to protect a green belt.
Yep.
It's good for Cambridge,
yep,
good for Paris, really good for Guelph, because the source of their water is that moraine. He got that unanimous support on that bill, got it to second reading. It's going to committees, which means it's going to become legislation. He's got backbencher conservatives saying, why can't we do that in my riding? And the way he did that was how Greens do politics. He talked and had conversations with backbenchers. He built consensus. Then Green members of the public, like grassroots around the province, contacted our members of provincial parliament and said, we really want this. It's really, really important. And so the Greens, we're prepared to, because we're working from values and principles, and we're quite happy if we have a brilliant idea, we'll just let the Liberals or whoever want to take credit for it as long as it happens.
Right. Okay. I got it. So in terms of any kind of effect to, just everyday life, are we looking at, additional taxes? Are there penalties like carbon taxes, that sort of stuff that would affect people or not?
Well, I think there will be effects on people, but not as severe as ignoring the climate crisis and continuing to have extreme weather. I live pretty close to the Grand River. Yep. If the beautiful banks and walls and safeguards they have in place, and they've already at least once had a blockade across the roads, if the river goes over there, that has a very significant effect because I don't have the home insurance to cover that flood damage, right? So ignoring the climate crisis is going to affect us much more than dealing with it. The Green Party, Brian May took objection because I called there's a weak and ineffectual carbon tax, and he said it's not a carbon tax. It's not a carbon tax. That's what the Conservatives call it. And I said, well, Brian, okay, you're right. It's a weak and ineffectual method to deal with the crisis.
Yeah. Yep.
So the Green Party doesn't try to, we're not going to do that, totally get rid of something and waste money. We salvage what we can and move forward, but we would move towards having a carbon fee and dividend. And the carbon fee is at the source, so that and no exceptions. So at the wellhead, wherever it's generated, the fee is paid. It's revenue neutral. The government doesn't keep any of it, and then all that money goes back as a dividend. And the way the dividend would work is people who use a lot of energy, it's going to cost them because the dividend won't cover what it'll cost them. And that's, if you think of market economics, that's an incentive to change their habits.
Sure.
Okay,
sure.
Get rid of the motorboat and buy a sailboat, get rid of the internal combustion engine, get an electric vehicle. And what it does is it corrects the market defect, because the current economy it hasn't got carbons costed properly. They're too close to being free. But the people who don't have high income, those are the people who don't have a car and maybe have a small house. They're going to end up having more money in their pocket with the dividend. So that change will be a very big market incentive, and it will affect, the prices of goods and whatever. But if business has notice, business is pretty, they're not so nimble you can change the law overnight.
Yep.
Right? You got to give businesses notice.
Sure.
And businesses build plans. They're very methodical. They build their plans. There's lots of Canadian businesses that are at the forefront of the green economy. And there's many, like Toyota is already building electric vehicles, right? So then we're going to start rewarding the innovators who are moving to the green economy, adding an extra incentive for other businesses. Okay. One of the things is about packaging. Things are, if you pay attention, things are very, very overpackaged.
No question about it.
Lots of plastic. I talked to the women at a store in downtown Galt, and they said to me, they knew I was a Green Party candidate, and they said it would make you cry if you see all the plastic that comes in here. And they say, we try to reuse it, we try to, but it's too much.
Yes.
And one of the things the Green Party would do is make the producers responsible for all of that packaging. So that it creating all incentives for us to try to be more green, but in a way that offers leadership, right? That the government doesn't do it, they create conditions for ordinary people and business to do it.
Okay. So I guess some of the concerns that I've, sort of run into in terms of discussing these issues with people, especially, I don't label myself a climate change denier or pro, green as well. But some of the concerns that I hear out there is some of the solutions that are getting thrown out come at a very high cost, okay, and the ability to measure its effects are greatly skewed. In fact, it could be a very long time before we even potentially see any of those effects, if any at all. And then if you take a look at, for example, electric vehicles, where, you know, probably Europe has been a little bit more ahead of us than us. You know, you take countries like Germany that have run into issues of providing electricity that they even had to refire up coal-powered plants. So how do you deal with that argument?
So the Green Party, it's not that we want everything to be done immediately. We need to get started, because we actually haven't gotten started. Like, we're way behind on our targets. So the Green Party wants to stop the subsidies. Like, we're subsidizing multinational corporations, they're not even Canadian corporations, to produce the coal, you know, the fossil fuels that we don't want. So there's no reason at all to have those subsidies. So you stop those subsidies, no new pipelines, okay? Because it takes a long time for pipelines to be built. And the reality is, by the time they're built, we want to be transitioned off. And no fracking. Fracking is very bad for water sources and methane
Agreed.
gas
Yeah.
and earthquakes. So, but then what we do is we have a transition. So in a period of time, you know, that's laid out, we're not importing oil and we're not exporting oil. So there's a period of time where we're not off of the oil and gas, but we're containing it with the Canadian sources. To the extent we're doing transportation by rail, we want to run detours around cities so that any substances that is dangerous are not going through populated areas. Mm-hmm. So, and then a very, very gentle on the people. So major investment on the people to transition them into the green economy. The fuel industry, it's very capital intensive, mm-hmm. and not less and less labor. So the green economy would offer more jobs, but we need to have the government there to have money invested on retraining and apprenticeships and relocation so that we get people into that sector. And as far as the electric vehicles are concerned, you need innovation around the batteries. The batteries are still a limiting factor. You need more charging stations. And so we'd be looking at a 10-year plan of trying to make it more and more attractive for electric vehicles. At the end of 10 years, we're not wanting any new internal combustion engines to be sold, mm-hmm. but we're not clearing them off the roads for a period of time. Yep. And then also moving into biofuels and carbon neutral. So it's to the extent that people argue we shouldn't do it because of the transition, the answer to that is not to not do it. The answer to that is to make sure the transition is well planned, that business and ordinary people have a transition plan and have plenty of notice. And then we start, because what we're doing right now is we are not moving in the right direction. Mm-hmm. We're still lurching along, wildly dancing on the decks of the Titanic. Like, we're not even moving deck chairs. We're intensifying the party and maybe even making the engine go faster. Mm-hmm. And the reality is we need to begin a methodical, careful plan to get in the right direction with targets that make sure that the planet doesn't heat up too fast.
Yeah, and I get that. Unfortunately, you almost have a populace that's somewhat jaded in hearing about the warnings. I mean, we've been hearing about these warnings for a long, long time, and some of these time thresholds have come and gone, and whatever was predicted didn't happen. So it tends to make people skeptical of the whole approach. Is there something else behind it?
Right. And I'm going to just challenge you on that, because one of the things that happens, we talk about environmental racism. Mm-hmm. And the reality is that the most vulnerable people are the ones who are going to get hit by the climate change. So will the most rich, privileged people feel the impact of the climate crisis? Probably not until the entire planet is ready to go. But social justice is an important value for me. So the fact that in the North, the Inuit are losing their traditional lifestyle. Like I'm more worried about the Inuit and the Inuit tradition and Inuit people than I am about polar bears. But you do see what's happening to the polar bears, and the reality is the Inuit people rely on those, that ecosystem for their lifestyle. So, and Canada is actually heating up faster than other parts of the world, partly because of the impact on the Arctic. If you notice, so weather is what happens day to day. Climate is what happens in seasons, and the Arctic heating up and what happens to the water means on our east and west coasts, spring is coming later and later every year, and winter is also kind of pushed back. So here we are, October, we have these unseasonable, and then the extreme weather. Like I do not remember as a child having floods in Toronto the way they've had the floods. The volume of the Grand River, my understanding is that the volume on the day that there was the flood in the early 70s, that we've exceeded that volume twice.
Oh, wow. Okay.
But that Cambridge had invested a lot of money on controlling the water. And I do know on the day that, so it happened once in the summer, because my partner wanted to go canoeing that day, and I said, there's actually a warning, you're not allowed to go out, right? I mean, he's not that foolish, he just hadn't checked the forecast. And then it happened with some ice flow in the winter. And on that winter occasion, which was just about 6 or 7 months later, like I said, I live across from the river. I love the water. I love nature, but I have some concern when the water gets high because I'm close, right? And they did have the road was blocked. Concession Street at the bridge was blocked.
I remember.
And it came up. It was very close. And the damage that happened in Brantford. There were millions of dollars of damage in Brantford. They weren't quite as ready as Cambridge was. So to suggest that nothing is happening, I think is a little bit naive. And if you look at the damage with extreme storms in other parts of the world, so it's happening. Will the privileged people who are wealthy suffer? Well, they'll suffer last.
I see. Okay, got it. Okay. So with regards to your party's leadership, are you confident with your party's leader?
I like Elizabeth May a lot.
Great.
I think she's quite brilliant. She knows a lot, but she's not trying to do this alone. Like I mentioned before, that the party's platform was based on evidence, and she's got a team who's doing the research, and she listens to the team. She has held her own in terms of debates and in Parliament. The decorum is not always, the Green Party, we like things to be handled with a high level of respect. She's managed to, she was, I think, nominated one year as the parliamentarian of the year. And part of it is because apparently she never missed any sessions, and part of it is because she did her homework and she was respectful to the other parties, working with everyone. So I have a high level of respect for her leadership. I felt that she did very well in the English speaking debate on Monday. To me, didn't think she got the recognition that I expected. Now, my mother phoned me and told me how brilliant she was.
Oh, very good.
So, you know, and my mother wasn't always a Green Party fan. It's taken a while, but the press didn't right away, and I'm not too sure whether it's because they're not used to, you know, like they got this assumption that it's a two-party game, which politics is too serious to play as a game. We need to stop making it be like a poker game, and we need to make it be a joint. We need everyone working together.
Yes. Yeah.
The complex social problems, never mind the climate crisis, the complex social problems are like, no one is so smart that they could be the prime minister and make all the decisions. We actually would need all of the people sitting in Parliament to work on all these complex solutions together. So Elizabeth May has got these collaborative skills. I think sometimes maybe she isn't recognized yet, but I'm happy with her leadership.
Good, perfect. Okay, so obviously, you know, the name of our show is called I Love Cambridge. What do you love about Cambridge?
I really love the river.
That seems to be the easy answer.
Well, it's a transition for me because I grew up for a lot of the time. So I lived in Hamilton, I lived in Toronto. We had a cottage on a lake. And then I, you know, kind of reoriented myself around the river. So I canoe and I do a lot of cycling. So I can take trails and kind of go along the water and you can kind of feel the seasons so much more, you know, close to the water. I love the downtown cores. How, you know, if you're in Galt, it has a certain feeling, but Preston has a different feeling. And I know Hespeler is in a different riding, but Hespeler is part of Cambridge. So there's and you don't have to go very far to be out in the country, right? And feel that. So. And I live in I mean, I think it's very neat how people identify so much with those historic downtown cores. Like when I first came to this area, it was like I arrived in the early 80s and it became Cambridge in the 70s, and people continued to talk about Preston, Galt, and Hespeler, but there was nothing on the maps and no signs, right? So someone would tell me it's in Galt. And how, you know, how do you, like, it was all folklore to figure out where Galt was, right? And then I guess finally the powers that be gave up and put the maps together the way the people were talking. And so I kind of like that resilience of the old traditions that people will, you know, like you go to a meeting and someone will say, I'm from West Galt and I'm from Hespeler, and I'll say, I'm from Cambridge. Have you heard of it?
Yeah, for sure. It is very interesting to see that, you know, that old rivalry, and it's all done very, it's done in jest, obviously, in most cases. And, but it's always fun to see. Obviously, me being a realtor and entertaining people that move here from out of town, well, they come to Cambridge, and then once they're here for, you know, even a couple of months, you know, we'll follow up with them and they'll say, you know, we're getting a real kick out of this Galt, Preston, and Hespeler thing, you know. So it's interesting to see an outsider's, or I should say somebody that comes from away, come in and
I think we do a pretty good job of welcoming the newcomers. Like,
absolutely.
I don't think there's a, you know, I mean, I did live in a really small town, and there was a joke that you were a newcomer until you had grandparents in the cemetery, right?
Yes. Yeah.
But my grandmother wouldn't agree to change her cemetery.
Well, yes. Well, somebody told me the other day about Paris. They said if you're a native of Paris, you're a Parisian. If you're from outside, you're a parasite.
Yeah. So, but I don't find it that way. I find that people are quite welcoming. I also find it quite amusing in terms of Waterloo region.
Yes.
that there's, Cambridge is, there's that identity as being part of Waterloo Region, and I have a strong affinity for a lot of the really, I mean, like not internationally, but maybe nationally, Waterloo Region, like our housing programs, our affordable housing programs are among the top 3 or 4 in the entire country.
Okay, so you've opened up something that I'd like to talk to you about. Obviously, housing is a big issue.
Mm-hmm.
What's the answer from the Green Party on dealing with our housing crisis?
So the Green Party does distinguish between affordable housing, which is to make sure that everyone has a home, and home ownership. Mm-hmm. Right? So, and some of the parties, when you listen to them, their solution to affordable housing is really more about the housing market and purchasing. So on a safe, affordable housing, the Green Party, I mean, there's places where there can be federal leadership in terms of the national housing policy that the Liberals implemented to get those targets going more quickly, to do things to encourage more construction of cooperative and affordable housing, to maybe have some incentives for changing some of the, like, although the zoning is municipal, we could do some collaboration to have, places where there's tiny houses, or maybe have zoning. This especially would work, I mean, if you think about it nationally, in places like Vancouver and Toronto, where people mm-hmm. can get a mortgage and they don't need to be related. Mm-hmm. I've talked to a number of people as seniors who are, there's an idea of building a house that would have, say, maybe 6 couples sharing the house, and it's, or it's renovated, but it's not they're sharing common spaces, but they have independent spaces. So there's some creative things around affordable housing. With respect to home ownership, one of the things that happens when you do grants for new first-time home buyers, it kind of shifts the price a little bit, right?
Absolutely. Yeah.
So, I know a lot of people, they look at the value. So I own the condo I live at, and I may be in a minority, is they tell me that my condo is worth more money, and I don't plan to move. I like it. I want to stay here. And I think, oh no, too much of my wealth is going to be tied up in the housing, and maybe I won't be able to pay my property taxes, right? Like, mm-hmm, mm-hmm. and so there's things that, I think, it's a complex problem, but we have people who are kind of playing the real estate market the way they used, the way the stock market gets played. And of course, yeah. This unregulated stock market, people start playing the stock market and you get a crash. Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. And it isn't just real estate and the stock market. I lived in a rural community, and I talked to farmers, and they're trying to make a living selling crops, where investors who know nothing about farming are in the commodities market playing around with the price of wheat.
Yeah.
Right? And
yeah.
These guys are trying to decide what to do. These farmers are trying to decide what to, and the person I talked to was pretty good at the futures market in grain. Mm-hmm. And wheat and corn and soybeans. Mm-hmm. But he, he said that there was this unpredictable element because there were people playing the market for the sake of playing the market, and they weren't farmers and they didn't know what they were doing. Right?
Yeah.
And that's happening in the housing market.
Yeah, I think I agree. I agree with you to a certain extent on that. I think especially with the, with the futures market, I think really that the big movers or manipulators of that market seem to be the massive consumers of it. So, your General Mills and that sort of thing. I think they're the ones really whipping around the market. In terms of housing, where I'm concerned about, there's a couple things. First of all, there's a supply issue. Mm-hmm. And when we deal with supply, the only way we can deal with supply is obviously increase the supply in order to soften the prices. But how do we deal with the supply if there are bylaws or general laws that you've got your green belts and that sort of thing that really restrict building to happen, which is causing in itself a supply and demand issue. So we're concerned about housing. I get it. I completely understand that. But when we make development so difficult, it in itself creates that problem. So
right.
That's my concern.
Yeah. So
the other
this
thing that
this by definition is a complex problem, because complex problems are wicked problems.
Yep.
Those are the problems where you fix something here.
Yep.
And it causes a problem over here. So
yep.
the green belts, we need green belts because, we now realize that swamps are not just, a place for mosquitoes, but wetlands are actually protect us, a buffer in a flood. We actually, for food security, need to have farmlands, right? So the idea of the green belt is a food security and an environmental issue. One of the responses is to move towards high density, right? That we create high density in the cities. I know I watch condominiums because I live in a condominium, and one of the things that's interesting and I think problematic is so where I live, very few people initially bought to live there. There were people who bought as investors. And then it sat empty for a while, which it wasn't as much a problem for me as someone I knew who was at a high rise, that she said the halls were empty. That the units were sold, but they weren't rented yet. And she's walking down a hallway and she doesn't have neighbors. So there's a piece of I know that Vancouver experimented with trying to restrict foreign ownership. And
they have a vacant property tax as well, I believe.
And I know with the like in some of the downtown areas, the provincial election, we were looking at space during the election, and there were too many incentives or like to keep something vacant rather than to rent it out for a month or two, right? Like whether it's a political party or a pop-up business, sometimes that happens. So I think this is an area, so in terms of politically how to solve it, it's not like I have all the answers right now. One of the things the Green Party wants to do is, in terms of intergovernmental cooperation, is to have a coalition, a council of Canadian governments. So if you think of the Senate, it's a different configuration. So you'd have representatives of the federal government, representatives of the provincial government. You'd have municipalities, so that the big cities are represented, medium cities, townships are represented, and then you'd have Indigenous leaders sitting there as well. And so it wouldn't be up to the mayors meeting with the prime minister or the premiers trying to negotiate with the prime minister, because that can get stuck on partisan party lines. It would be, this working council and I think the idea would be is we need to kind of coordinate and have national leadership around some of the zoning and some of the restrictions, so that we're trying to build the policies that puts a premium on housing as homes for people. And some of that would be affordable housing that is for people who can we don't want people to be homeless, and we don't want them to have precarious housing. And then some of that would be creative around home ownership, like maybe a way that three friends can buy a house that they're going to live in, not that they're going to rent, right? And I think, you always have to be careful when you do it with red tape, because there's always going to be someone who's going to get caught that, it's not that they're trying to flip a house or, make money on the short run. Maybe they inherited their mother's house and they still own two houses or whatever. Like, so you kind of have to look for the exceptionalities. But I think what you want is to have the housing market be primarily for housing.
I get it. But really, in the grand scheme of things, renting, an investor who provides a rental accommodation is servicing the housing market, because somebody needs a place to live. Like if you're going out in Cambridge today looking for a rental, A, they're expensive, and B, where the heck are they? So if you don't have rentals to rent out, that's not good either.
No, and I think probably what I would like to create is a market that made it more attractive for people to have, so that they're like sometimes the housing for low income people is what they call them slum landlords. And I think the reason they call them that isn't because they own low income housing. It's because they're not looking after the people who live there. They're not very good landlords.
Mm-hmm.
Like no one would want them as a landlord, and they're kind of taking advantage. So it's if we had more investment in cooperative, co-ops, housing co-ops, more investment in affordable housing, ways of having the neighborhoods and the housing secured so that landlords who are prepared to rent to people at the lower part of the housing market are not taking all of the risks themselves, that
Mm-hmm.
there's maybe rent subsidies that are available, that they know that the rent that the people are going to be secure, so that we can deal with the market. Because what's happening now is some of the people who are buying real estate are for example Airbnbs. That kind of is doing a runner, and now Airbnbs are some of them are run by big business, and they just aren't regulated the way hotels and motels are regulated.
Mm-hmm.
And I know in Toronto, the Airbnbs are taking away from the housing market, that people can't get housing because of Airbnbs.
They'll make more money on the Airbnb.
Yeah, and I mean, my condo, we are happy to have people who, whether they're rental or whether they own, we want them to be part of our community, so that it's a small condo. So one of the neighbors, somebody else took her to the hospital, right?
Mm-hmm.
And we sit out and we check on one another, and my neighbor's window's open, and I go and tell them, you left your window open, right? And that doesn't matter whether you're rental or whether you own, but someone who's an Airbnb isn't going to have that connection, right? And neighborhoods make communities safe for people. They also have people being less socially isolated. So
Mm-hmm.
so it's kind of like we need to have the market. Right now the market is, I think, the tools for measuring and how it's set up there, it's there's too much that's all about dollars. Mm-hmm. And investment. And if we create some incentive, like there would be landlords who might find it really attractive to be maybe to have a shared ownership in affordable housing, if the risk is kind of managed and it's going to be well taken care of, as compared to maybe having their own. And I'm not being specific about it. I'm just saying that we need to have a more nuanced way of looking at the market, so that people who want to invest in real estate, it's safe for them to invest in affordable housing, and we're attracting people whose values are consistent with who we want to be landlords, as compared to slum landlords who were kind of doing it for a while with the idea of making money and getting out. And then of course we want to I don't know how you protect that part where you have the attractiveness for foreign owners is that relative to other parts of the world, Canadian real estate is still a deal.
Yeah, it's still a deal and a safe investment for sure. Yeah, it's those aren't easy answers or easy questions to answer. I appreciate it. I think in terms of real estate being a business, I think I've been in the real estate business for 32 years. I think it's more of a business now than it was 32 years ago, but it still very much was a business. And, at the same time, it's also a business that's, if too many laws exist in it, make it subject to unintended circumstances. And, you know, when you've got, you know, people like what we'd label slum landlords, well, slum landlords in many cases, you know, first of all, they're slum landlords for a reason. And it's usually because there's very heavy-handed laws that probably are a little bit more favored to the tenant side, which make it very difficult for somebody to be a responsible owner because, you know, when somebody's a landlord, the assumption right away is that he's the rich or she's the rich landlord.
Mm-hmm.
And a lot of those guys are not. I mean, they've got a mortgage on that property too. But when there's restrictions on how much you can raise the rent by or how much you can, you know, have capital expenditures sort of amortized, it makes it very difficult to be on that side of the road as well. So these are not easy questions to answer for sure.
Yeah, and the supply side of it is there really aren't incentives. You know, the region of Waterloo has tried to create some incentives but it's hard for a municipality to do that alone. It would be better to have provincial and federal leadership in there. And so one of the things where Waterloo Region is a leader is on housing first.
Mm-hmm.
So that's, again, affordable housing. And housing first is actually taking a person from, so someone who's chronically homeless, is they're not housed consistently. And what you do is you get them into housing, and then employment and health and a whole lot of other problems are easier. Like, it's way easier to go to a job interview if you have a house.
No question.
Right.
Yeah.
And so one of the things with the housing first model, and there's, you know, Menno Homes in Waterloo Region is got affordable housing, and they've got some projects where they actually have social workers attached to their housing model.
Mm-hmm.
So that people who are precariously housed are people who have really complex, maybe mental health and perhaps addiction problems. And landlords who know it's hard to get rid of a tenant and know it's hard to collect on rent, they're not you know, they're not your first choice tenants, right?
Yeah.
But if you have your housing first project or your affordable housing project set up that you have wraparound support around people, then the landlord doesn't have to worry about those problems because the person's going to be supported, right? And you can have some other safeguards in place. So I think I agree with what you're saying. You can't do this with, you know, it's almost like the regulations are all sticks.
Yes. Yeah.
Right.
Sure.
And they're hoops, and people have to jump through them, and then they get penalized. What you need to do is create regulations to develop markets for housing that kind of meets the needs, and investments that are attractive, and that some of the risks, there's some risks that the landlord, if you're trying to have affordable housing, there's some risks that you have to protect the landlord from, right?
Yep. Absolutely. Okay, Michelle. Well, that's I was there any question that I didn't ask you that I should have?
Oh, you're a good interviewer. You're one of the best.
Awesome. Well, thank you very much for being a guest on the show. It was great. I wish you good luck, and you're 10 days away.
Yes.
Down to the home stretch now.
Yeah, that's true. Thank you very much.
Very good. Thanks again.
All right. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye now.